Right. So, you know that feeling when you order something online and the product description says one thing, but what actually turns up at your door is completely different? Yeah, well, buckle up, because that's basically what just happened with Rachel Reeves and the budget, except instead of a dodgy jumper from Amazon, we're talking about 26 billion quid in tax rises that apparently nobody actually needed. But before we proceed, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more updates on the UK political insight. Thank you. The Office for Budget Responsibility just dropped some absolutely nuclear information that blows apart everything, and I mean everything, we were told in the run-up to Wednesday's budget. And if you thought politicians bending the truth was bad before, wait until you hear this one, because Rachel Reeves might just be cementing her place in history as Britain's most dishonest chancellor. Grab your popcorn. This is going to be wild. So let's rewind a bit. In the weeks and months leading up to the budget, what were we hearing? Constantly, relentlessly, from Treasury officials, from sources, from the Chancellor herself, we were told there was this massive financial black hole, a fiscal chasm, an economic abyss. Whatever dramatic metaphor you want to use, the message was clear. Britain was in the red to the tune of 20 to 30 billion pounds, and Rachel Reeves was going to have no choice, absolutely no choice, but to raise taxes by billions to fill this gaping void in the nation's finances. It was presented as this unavoidable, painful necessity, the medicine we all had to swallow because the previous government left such a mess. Reeves blinged it all on downgrades to productivity projections, which she pinned squarely on Tory austerity, Brexit, and the pandemic, a perfect storm of economic disasters that meant your taxes simply had to go up. There was no other way. We were basically told to brace for impact. Except here's the thing. Here's the absolutely jaw-dropping, mind-blowing, are you actually serious thing? The OBR just published documents this lunchtime that reveal Rachel Reeves knew as far back as September 17th that this so-called fiscal black hole wasn't 30 billion pounds. It wasn't even close. It was 2.5 billion. 2.5. Let me put that in perspective for you. The difference between 30 billion and 2.5 billion is roughly the same as the difference between owing your mate a tenner and owing them the entire GDP of a small nation. It's not even in the same ballpark. It's not even the same sport. So what does this actually mean? Well, it suggests, pretty strongly in fact, that the Chancellor then embarked on a 2-month-long deliberate campaign to soften voters up, to warm us all up to the idea of record-high tax rises, all while knowing full well that they weren't actually necessary. Think about that for a second. While you were worrying about your bills, your mortgage, whether you could afford to heat your home this winter, Rachel Reeves was busy spinning a story about fiscal black holes that she knew wasn't true. That's not political spin. That's not creative accounting. That's just straight-up dishonesty on an absolutely massive scale. Now, to be fair, let's look at what actually happened with the numbers, because there is some genuine economic movement here. The productivity downgrade that Reeves kept banging on about did wipe 16 billion from projected tax receipts. That bit is real. But here's what she conveniently failed to mention during all those doom and gloom press conferences. The OBR told her in September that this shortfall had been almost entirely offset by increases in real wages and inflation. Almost entirely. So yes, productivity was down, but people were earning more, which meant more tax revenue was coming in anyway. These things basically canceled each other out. The net result, that terrifying 30 billion black hole shrank down to a completely manageable 2.5 billion. But wait, it gets even better, or worse depending on how you look at it. By October 31st, that 2.5 billion deficit had disappeared completely, vanished, poof, gone. It had actually transformed into a 4.2 billion surplus. A surplus, as in the government had more money than it thought it did. And this projection did not change before the budget. Let me repeat that because it's absolutely crucial. The OBR's numbers did not change between October 31st and Budget Day, which means every single briefing we heard from Treasury officials, every source whispering to journalists, every statement from the Chancellor herself about the desperate need to raise 20 to 30 billion in taxes was categorically, demonstrably, provably untrue. So if there was no black hole, if the finances were actually in surplus, why on earth did Rachel Reeves announce 26 billion pounds in tax rises? Great question. The answer, unfortunately, is pretty simple and pretty depressing. Because she wanted to. The 26 billion in tax rises announced on Wednesday were entirely of her own choosing. Not forced by circumstances. Not demanded by economic reality. Not the unavoidable consequence of Tory mismanagement. They were a political choice made by Rachel Reeves to fund spending she wanted to fund. Specifically, and let's be crystal clear about this, to fund yet more welfare handouts. This also raises some pretty awkward questions about that Downing Street press conference on November 4th. You remember that one. Early morning, Rachel Reeves standing there hinting in a major way that income tax rises were on the table. People were genuinely worried. Working families were doing the math on what an income tax hike would mean for their household budgets. And all along, she knew the fiscal situation wasn't nearly as bad as she was making out. Why scare people like that if you don't have to? Why float the idea of hitting people's income directly unless you're trying to make whatever you actually announce seem less bad by comparison? It's a classic negotiating tactic, really. Start with something extreme so your actual position looks reasonable. Except this isn't a negotiation. This is governing. These are people's lives. Rachel Reeves is now going to face some pretty intense questions from opposition politicians, from the media, and from voters who are starting to realize they've been had. Why did she voluntarily choose to breach those ironclad manifesto pledges without any good reason? And let's not forget what those tax rises went towards. The flagship announcement in the budget was abolishing the two-child benefit cap for universal credit. Now, you might have an opinion on whether that's good policy or not, but here's the thing. Both Rachel Reeves and Starmer repeatedly said during the election campaign that they would not do this. Repeatedly, on record, multiple times. And now they've done it anyway, funded by tax rises they promised wouldn't happen to fill a black hole that didn't exist. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the bigger picture here, because this isn't just about one budget or one set of numbers. This is about trust. This is about whether you can believe a single word this government says. Cast your mind back to last year's general election. What did Labor promise? They positioned themselves as sensible, center-left, moderate, trustworthy. They made rock-solid tax promises. They talked constantly about supporting working people. The party machinery worked overtime to reassure voters that Labor had changed, that they were serious, responsible, safe. And people believed them. Millions of people voted Labor based on those promises, based on that manifesto, based on the commitment that taxes for working people would not go up. And what happened the moment they got into government? They tore up every single promise, in full public view, no shame, no hesitation, just a complete 180 shift into what is increasingly looking like a hardline socialist government that's only willing to rob working people to hand money to what some are calling Benefit Street, Britain. Now, I'm not here to make moral judgments on welfare policy, but I am here to point out that this is categorically not what they said they would do. Labor promised just $8 billion in specific bespoke tax rises during the campaign. $8 billion. After the initial $40 billion tax rate in the first budget and this week's further $26 billion hike, they've now raised taxes by more than 7 times what they promised voters. 7 times! That's not rounding error. That's not fiscal flexibility. That's outright deception. And here's the real kicker. Those tax rises are funding pledges they explicitly ruled out during the campaign. The two-child benefit cap abolition that Starmer and Reeves said they wouldn't do? Done. The massive increases in public spending that they said weren't necessary? Happening. Every single thing they told voters not to worry about is now government policy. The manifesto that millions of people voted for might as well have been fiction. It's becoming genuinely difficult to view this government, on economic grounds at least, as anything other than the most dishonest since the Second World War. That's not hyperbole. That's not political point scoring. That's a reasonable conclusion based on the evidence of what they said versus what they've done. So where does this leave us? Well, Rachel Reeves has some serious explaining to do. The opposition is going to have an absolute field day with this. Every prime minister's questions, every media interview, every public appearance, she's going to be asked why she lied, why she knew the black hole was tiny but told everyone it was massive, why she raised taxes by $26 billion when she didn't need to. And unless she's got some absolutely spectacular answers that nobody's thought of yet, her credibility is shot. Once you lose trust on something this fundamental, this big, it's almost impossible to get it back.